Welcome. It is the year 395 AD. The Roman Empire was divided. While the Eastern Empire was ruled by Arcadius, the West was ruled by his younger brother Honorius. Rome was weak. My task now is to save the Western Roman Empire and keep it from falling. Welcome to Crusader Kings 3: Fallen Eagle. Yeah, welcome back. This time it's hopefully not going like last time. This time I think I can make it. I got a strategy now. I've been doing a lot of research and I have to say the campaign has become a lot more difficult since the new update. And my opinion of many decisions I made last time has changed significantly. And yeah, that's why I would say, let me show you my plan, and let's save the Western Roman Empire, this time for real. And so begins my journey with the aim of saving the Western Roman Empire. This time, my way of playing will change completely. Instead of playing as aggressive as possible, I will try to play more passively this time. But the key to success is to abandon Britannia. I think if you don't abandon Britannia, it's not possible. I think it's just not possible to save the empire. Only by making this decision will it be possible to get enough gold to save civic politics and the other two. My vassals were also quite happy with me. In the dynasty tree, I went for law this time, which increased the popular opinion by 5. But now the most important part begins. Because to save the civic politics, I have to build buildings all over the empire, at best in provinces that already have 1 or 2 buildings. With the rest of the money, I increased my troops. Yeah, and I'm gonna take pikemen and light footmen because they're not so expensive. And gave it to my vassals so that they would have a better opinion of me. I also married my half-sister to my most powerful vassal to secure his loyalty and to have an ally. In the following point, my opinion has also changed significantly, because I'm of the opinion that it is very important to fight and win the war against the Visigoths. And so it went into the first war. It is important that I win this war, because otherwise one of the political laws would probably fail due to bad opinion and the loss of my troops. Fortunately, the AI is not the smartest, and so I was able to win the war quite relaxed and without any resistance. So I had won my first war. Honorius had married in the meantime, to make another alliance possible. For the time being, all preparations are now complete, but I will have to continue building and making vassals happy if I want to save all the political laws. The most important thing now is to keep building and influencing my vassals to get more opinion from them. So far, I have made good progress, and the opinion of my vassals has also improved considerably. Gold is especially important to bribe the vassals and to build buildings. Therefore, any war or other spending of money is a high risk. My goal is to get every vassal at least 60 opinion. If I can do that, I can save the diplomatic politics. At the same time, this law is also the one that can be the most difficult for me. This is because bribing vassals can sometimes take a lot of time. Through the construction of many buildings, the development also progressed over time. Yeah, it's actually okay. Okay, that's pretty bad. It's 0 everywhere. So Italy is looking pretty good meanwhile.
Hello there.
Everything was going well, but suddenly an event happened. I don't know why, but I had the feeling that it would make sense to take the more expensive option. I don't know why. Even if it would put me in the red for the time being. But just when I had collected some money again, Honorius got sick. So I had to spend a lot of money again to find a good doctor. Slowly I started to worry, because the fulfillment of the political laws was getting tighter and tighter. And so I could do nothing but watch as it became more and more dangerous for me. Moreover, a peasant uprising is brewing, which in return means that I will get less gold by raising my armies. But there were also good news. Honorius finally grew up, and so I could soon level up the diplomatic skill tree. But the joy only lasted a short time, because shortly afterwards there was a peasant uprising. Fortunately, it was enough to send my elite troops into battle, as there were not many peasants. So I was able to earn at least a little gold in that time. This one rose as I expected it would. Just hope that this one is like kind of bit back up here. Would be pretty nice, guys, please. The first uprising was defeated, but there was not much time to relax, because there was already a second peasant uprising that would soon rise. Moreover, things were not looking good for the political laws. But I was determined to achieve my goal of saving all the laws, and so I tried everything to bring the bar up somehow. Yeah, alliance, okay. But the next time I looked, I got a frightening result. Oh my god! It's like failing any second. The first imperial law is as good as lost. And at the same time, a peasant uprising has risen. Because I now had to use my army to defeat the peasant uprising, I got considerably less gold, and so I set my priorities on the other two imperial laws, as they would still bring me strong advantages in the future. And as long as only one law fails, I can still tank it. And so I first devoted myself to the peasant uprising. And at the same time, I waited for the failure of the first imperial law. In the fight against the peasant uprising, I was able to quickly gain the upper hand, thanks to my elite troops. It was only a little difficult to capture their leader, and so the war took a long time. But little by little, I had defended almost all the armies. But in the meantime, so much time had passed that I was surprised that the imperial law had not failed yet. And so, I wanted to see how the political law stood. Oh my god! Oh my god, guys. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god, that was so close. Like, that was so close. I never thought that I would make it. Well, as you can see, it actually happened. I managed to fulfill the diplomatic laws after all. I must say that I never thought I would be able to save the Diplo law. I just don't know, but I never thought I would do it. But now that the imperial laws are secured for the time being, I will take care of the rest of the peasant uprising. And after 2 short battles, I had already won the war. Now the worst was over for the time being. Nevertheless, I wanted to make sure that the bars really moved upwards, and so, for the time being, I continued influencing vassals and buildings. All the bars of the imperial laws rose again. For the first time in this campaign, I had the time to take things a little easier. Nevertheless, I did not want to wage any wars for the time being. I wanted to take full care of the imperial laws first, Besides, my vassals liked me more and more. The Western Roman Empire slowly began to rise again from the ashes. Time passed and I continued to build buildings and try to improve people's opinion of me. Sometimes I also helped my allies with wars. And as long as I made sure that my army did not fall below 3,000 soldiers, everything was fine. And I even had to help the Eastern Roman Empire in a war against the Visigoths. But the most important thing of all is that the Western Roman Empire is now finally moving up again. And if it continues like this, the first wars of expansion will soon begin. For the time being, however, not much changed. I built buildings and influenced vassals, as always. But by now, I could see the effects of my efforts, because the imperial laws were clearly secured. If I continued like this, I would soon be able to improve them. And I wanted to have them improved in any case, before I fought larger wars. Besides, my wife became pregnant, and once the child is born, I no longer have to fear being suddenly murdered. I was very happy when I found out that it was a boy, because now the succession to the throne was secured. Only the hairstyle is not quite what I had imagined. What is that? I mean, son, please, get a proper haircut. At some point, I was attacked by a few smaller nations from Africa.
Hello there.
This war suited me very well because it was a nice change. I also noticed that my vassals in Africa had conquered land for me, which also pleased me. However, the war did not last long, as the opponents were overrun in no time. And now, I slowly began to make plans for the reconquest of Britannia. And the next time I looked at the imperial laws, I was very surprised. I had actually managed to get the bar to the top. Oh my god! Oh my god! So I could now improve civic politics to level 3. But I was an idiot and I improved to level 2, when I could have improved to level 3. Now I had to wait until I had enough money again to finally reach level 3. While I was waiting, I got the second son. I didn't expect I would have 2 children so soon, because Honorius is asexual and his wife is lesbian. Well, they seem to get along quite well after all. But then the time came. I upgraded civic politics to level 3. This upgrade will give me many advantages to push my economy even further. Immediately afterwards, I even had another child. This time it was a girl. But more importantly, I managed to stabilize the empire. This is the beginning of the time of the wars of expansion. But not only I wanted to expand, my vassals had also begun to conquer land for me. Now I had new land in Africa and Germania, but the Eastern Roman Empire had also expanded. It's important that I always keep an eye on the current strength of the East, because if they are greatly weakened, this could be my chance to take over large parts of the East. But at the moment, it's important for me to have the East as a strong ally for crisis situations, because just because the Empire is doing well again does not mean that another crisis cannot arise. By the way, what actually happened to the Hunnic Empire? I mean, oh wow, the Hunnic Empire is really dangerous. Well, at least for the moment, the Huns no longer pose a threat, and so the greatest danger to the Roman Empire is the Sassanid Empire, which lies on the border of the East. But fortunately, that's not my problem at the moment. For me, it was now a matter of considering where in Britannia I wanted to attack first. Unfortunately, there were many small nations, so I didn't have to fight a big war right away. I also considered how Honorius' death would affect the political laws in an emergency. I think this could be in danger when Honorius dies. So if he dies, I'm not sure if diplomatic politics will immediately drop, because they won't like his child that much as they like me. So Well, I guess I will have to find out if changing the ruler could cost me one of the imperial laws if I don't react quickly enough. If you know, feel free to post me an answer in the comments. I also think it's helpful to not support either side of the chariot race at the start of the campaign, as this can quickly and unnecessarily lower the vassal opinion. And the opinion is incredibly important, especially in the beginning, as you may have seen in the second part of my series. Now, it was time to go to war. But before I could attack myself, I first had to help my allies in the war. Fortunately, it was a small war, and so it was enough to use my men at arms. Later, there was even a small peasant uprising, which was also no problem. And since it consisted only of a few hundred men, it was quickly put down. Help me! And a little later, I also won the war for my allies. Please end the war. She's again pregnant. That's insane. That's just insane. In the meantime, the diplomatic policies had improved so much that I could upgrade them to level 2. However, I wasn't sure if I should do that, because it would directly cause me to lose 10 opinion of all my vassals. For this reason, I didn't want to improve them for the time being, because I already liked the bonuses I already had. And if I'm honest, I don't know if I will lose all the bonuses of the first law if I improve it to level 2, or if I will keep them. And so I decided to wait a while and take care of the reconquest of Britain first. First War of Expansion. Let's go. And so began the reconquest of Britain. Finally, after 27 years, it was time for the First War. The Roman Empire is finally reconquering. I will wait until the debuff is gone. Perfect. Ha! Oh my god. Okay, that was a pretty short war. Okay. Short battle. That was a pretty short battle. Okay, done. I lost 12 men. Oh. And they lost 400. Okay. It was no big or exciting war, but it was important to regain a foothold in Britannia. And so the first attack on Britain was successfully completed. But that was not enough, and so I went straight into the next war. This one was also over quickly. But these small conquests were only the beginning of what was to come. And besides conquering Britannia, I also had a new goal in mind: the restoration of the Praetorian Guard. I'm in the process of saving gold to reintroduce the Praetorian Guard as announced. If I manage to do that, I will get 1,500 special soldiers who will fight for me in wars. Of course, one should bear in mind that the real Praetorian Guard has killed many emperors who did not suit them or didn't give them enough money. So I must hope that this time it will be different. So while I was saving my gold, I started looking around for new possible conquests in Britain. I noticed that Saxonia, a Germanic tribe, had conquered large parts of Britannia, and now they had a quite large army. So I decided to launch my first attack on Saxonia as soon as possible to prevent them from becoming even more powerful. The next time I took a look at the Eastern Roman Empire, I noticed that it was now in a much worse military position than I was. This could also be due to the war with the Sassanids, but who knows? Besides Britannia, the Germanic tribes were also becoming more and more interesting for conquests. But then the wait was over. I'd finally accumulated enough gold to restore the Praetorian Guard. It's finally time. Restore the Praetorian Guard. On the 12th of November, 427 AD, the Praetorian Guard was restored. Let's go. That's very good. With the newly re-established Praetorian Guard, I now had even more possibilities to attack larger and stronger enemies. And of course, I also wanted to test my new troops against a few enemies. By the way, what's going on with the Huns? I mean, this boy got the same haircut as my son. Somehow, this guy reminds me of Geralt von Rivia. Could be because I recently watched the series, so don't blame me. But back to the important things. Saxonia had in the meantime lost large parts of their kingdom in Britain, and so I took the opportunity to attack the still small and unprotected tribes. I would have preferred to send in my new Praetorian Guard, but they were too far away, and so I took my normal army. I defeated their army and laid siege to their settlement. And so, this victory was also won quickly and clearly. And slowly but surely, the Roman influence on Britannia grew stronger again. But that was not the only success. In the meantime, the progress for the diplomatic policies had reached its maximum. And if I now succeed in fulfilling the military laws, I have absolutely nothing to fear. But suddenly, there were news from the east. Oh! Oh! My brother died! Oh! But my brother's death brought with it a great and perhaps unique opportunity. For now, his eldest son, Arcadius II, was in power, and he was sterile. This meant that he could not have children, and thus no heirs to the throne. In the event of Arcadius' death, his sisters would inherit, but otherwise there was no one to inherit, except Honorius. This meant that in the event of the accidental death of the whole Eastern Roman family, I would be able to take over the entire Eastern Roman Empire without conflict. Now I just had to weigh up whether I wanted to take over so much land at once and take the risk of being attacked on many fronts at the same time. On the positive side, I would have a much larger army and better profits. Also, I could unite the Roman Empire under a single ruler, which I wanted to do sooner or later anyway. Feel free to write your opinion on this in the comments. Now I really wanted to try out my Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard. There it is. Ladies and gentlemen, the Praetorian Guard. Nice. Oh yeah, special soldiers. They really look like elite infantry. So yeah, I will command them by myself. Britain is too far away because the Praetorian Guard is stationed in Rome and the journey would be too long. So I decided on a Germanic tribe. I added my men in arms and began the attack. It was the first somewhat major war of expansion, but it went without a single battle. Now, I will have to fight another war to test the Praetorians in battle. I've also founded a holy order, which I can now call upon to help me in wars as well. The stabilization of the empire opens up many new opportunities, and for me there were now two things I really wanted to pursue. The first was the expansion of my trade nodes, because if there's one thing that makes you rich in this mod, it's the expansion of these trading points. Trade nodes have only one problem, and that is that you can upgrade them endlessly. At a certain point, it's almost like cheating. For example, a friend of mine tried the whole thing to find out how unbalanced this mechanic really is, and in the end, he had a profit of 1,364 gold a month in Constantinople alone, and the trade node was almost level 600, So you can imagine what's possible with this mechanic. The second thing was to attack the title of the East, because as I already mentioned, the succession to the Emperor throne is weak. And since I was making good money at the time, I started my bloody business. Okay. Let's start. But first, and just bribe some vassals. And everything should be fine. Now I had to wait and hope that nothing went wrong. And luckily, it did. Now it will be perfect. And so I continued to follow the plan. The next victim was Acadia's daughter. Oh my god. I'm so sorry. Oh my god, that's... Oh my god. Poor child. Little girl. I'm sorry, but I have to. And although the murder was discovered, it was still successful. Acadius himself and a few others followed. Time passed, and by now, the Eastern Roman Empire was ruled by a 2-year-old girl, and Honorius had moved into the second place in the line of succession. Things were going quite well, and if I continue like this, I would have the East in my grip in a few years. But it was not to be. For while I was preparing the penultimate assassination, I noticed another way to gain power over the East. And I don't know why, but when I saw that it would cost me next to nothing and the army of the East was significantly weakened, something in me wanted to settle the whole thing in a last epic war. And now we will declare war on my claim. Yeah, perfect. Just inherit the whole in an epic war against the East. Let's go. Was it a smarter decision? I don't know. Probably not. But now there was no turning back. Besides, this was the ultimate test for my Praetorian Guard. It was important for me to win the war slowly and safely. If I lose large parts of my army, there was a danger that I would be attacked by other nations, or even more dangerous, that an imperial law would no longer be fulfilled. Oh, now it's getting interesting. Here they come. So I took things slowly, but it wasn't long before the first major battle took place. Just attack them when we're together. Oh my god. This victory would be very important. It was a great battle, from which I emerged clearly victorious in the end. Yeah, okay, nice. Woo, okay, perfect. Perfect. The first big battle was won, but the war was far from over. Things looked good for me, and my armies occupied more parts of the East. But the second great battle was not long in coming. Come in, please. Oh, okay, I think we win it. But it's close. Oh my god, they just got such a good commander. After a short back and forth, I was able to win the battle again. But there was one thing I had overlooked. I had not noticed that Honorius was still commanding an army and had been injured in the last battle. And because of that, the war continued. But then... Uh-oh! Honorius died of his wounds. It was a heavy blow that could have been avoided, but worse was to come. Because during the next battle there was terrible news again. Only this time the whole empire was in danger. This is one of the worst things that could happen. 4 years, oh my god. The death of Diodorus was one of the worst things that could happen to me, because now I not only had to win the war, but also make sure that my vassals liked me. Fortunately for me, they liked me more than I had expected. Surprisingly, they liked me. and I still had some money left to bribe them if the worst came to the worst. There was now only one goal: to end the war as soon as possible and quickly stabilize the empire before something worse could happen. Oh, it's like that's a war of kids. Like 2 kids fighting each other. Perfect. But now, back to the serious matches. Another factor that put me under time pressure is diplomatic policies, because if I'm too unpopular, the bar could go down again, which I wanted to avoid at all costs. So I kept the war going. But after a short time, the first disrupting news came. Factions had quickly formed against the young emperor, and if I could not end the war with the East quickly enough, it could be my undoing. And so I now concentrated on winning the war. The war was still clearly dominated by me, but my enemy was no longer the East, but rather the time it would take to defeat it. And so my armies besieged one settlement after the other to finally decide the war. Come on. 99? Are you kidding me? Now I was only one siege away from deciding the war for myself. At least, that's what I thought. But things were about to get so much more complicated.
Hello there.
Who is this guy? Oh my god. 12,000? And so I no longer had only one war to win. But since I'd almost defeated the East, I was sure that the next war would also be manageable, especially since I would get many new soldiers through the conquest of the East. But the Germanic tribe did not remain alone for long. 22,000? Okay. My situation was difficult, but far from hopeless, because even though I had 2 new enemies, I could now end my war with the East once and for all, and reunite the Roman Empire under one ruler. Oh my god. Okay, the worst thing happened, but at least we unite the whole Roman Empire under one ruler. So be it. Oh my god, that's just amazing. And are at war with 3 different nations at the same time. Finally, I had done it, and the war with the East was over. But I already had 3 new wars going, and the possibility that 1 or 2 of my vassals would rebel against me was not small. The problem with the conquest of the East is that I lack a strong ally who can help me in difficult times. But fortunately, I was able to find a good replacement who was even stronger. The Sassanid Empire. Oh my god, this alliance. Perfect. Very good, an alliance with the Sassanids. This alliance was extremely important. For one thing, I didn't have to worry about the Sassanids attacking me, and for another, I had the strongest empire in the world on my side. With the help of the Sassanids, I should be able to fight back the invaders. I decided to give up on one of the wars, because it was only about 1 county, and it was not worth the effort, and so I could now take care of the Germanic invaders. Now it was time to use my holy order, which immediately defeated a peasant uprising for me. But while I was sending my armies towards the Germanic tribes, I was attacked by my vassals, who demanded their independence. If I lose this war against my vassals, I would lose large parts of my empire. Damn it. And so I decided to spare the Germans for the time being in order to fight the greater danger. Caught in 3 wars, the situation was serious, but since I had been careful to not make my most powerful vassals even more powerful in the course of my campaign, I still had the larger army. Still, I did not have the strength to fight all wars at the same time, and so I had to come up with a plan of how to proceed and what to do in the worst case. my armies are in Italy. It's not that problematic if I lose this war, cause they are much stronger. I wouldn't lose that much land. I could reconquer that. Same case here. It's a lot, but I could also reconquer that. That's not that big a deal. The more problematic thing is this war, because I would lose such large parts of my empire. My plan was as follows. With the help of the Sassanid Empire, I wanted to defeat my vassals. However, I wanted to proceed cautiously, and so it was clear to me that I probably could not end the war quickly enough to beat back the Germans as well. But I had to at least try it. And so the attack on my vassals began. At first, everything remained calm, and the first cities fell under my control. But I had to be careful, because if I spread my armies too far, they could quickly be intercepted and destroyed separately from the main army. Eventually, the armies met. At first, a small army of mine was intercepted on a hill, but it was able to buy enough time for my main army to enter the battle. Together with the Sassanid armies, I managed to win the first battle. The second battle was also successful, and I was able to kill the enemy king. Thus, his faction had to withdraw from the war, and I only had 2 large vassals left to defeat. So far, everything has gone well. I've managed to intercept the enemy army on their flight. They won't make it. Yeah, they won't make it. There were 2 battles, both of which I was able to decide in my favor. And now that the main force of the enemy army was destroyed, I could take care of conquering the enemy territory. But this war is actually won. I mean, they got 3,000 soldiers. They can't do anything. With only 3,000 men and 1 kingdom against me, the war against my vassals was as good as won. But at the same time, I was about to lose one of the wars against the Germans. The defeat against the Germans was very annoying, but I could not have prevented it without avoiding greater evil. Fortunately, they had only conquered a small piece of land, so nothing that I could not reconquer later. The war against my vassals was also about to end, for it was only a matter of time before I could force them to surrender. And so I had finally managed to win my civil war. I think I won't make it until then. I'll try, but I guess it's too late. But I also lost the second war against the Germanic tribes. Anyway, now that all the wars in the empire were over, peace finally regained after 11 years. I was now busy restoring the empire to its original strength. And I also had to watch out because diplomatic policies had weakened due to the bad opinion about me. But otherwise, everything was fine. And my vassals liked me. Later, there was a small peasant uprising. But after all these wars, trust me, they are no longer a problem. And I also met old friends. What are the Visigoths doing up here? For real, how did they get there? But they could... Oh. Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows, only time. My next step was to found the Roman Empire and thus unite the West and the East, finally under one ruler. Oh my god, no way. At least that was my intention. But unfortunately, I lacked the title. And so I had to prepare for a war in order to free Gaul from the barbarians and be able to create the title of the Roman Empire. I also created my first legion, which I can now send into battle like the Praetorian Guard. On top of that, Diodorus had finally come of age, which would make a lot of things easier. I could also reclaim Constantinople, which I did, and over time the empire had recovered from the wars, and when my wife became pregnant, I felt ready to attack the barbarians to reclaim the land they had conquered. Let's do this. In addition to my normal soldiers, I was finally able to use my holy order and my new legions in this war. The barbarians could do little against my superior numbers. I hunted down their army and occupied their cities. I was able to decide almost all the battles in my favor, and with the conquest of the enemy capital, my victory was achieved. But I also received information that one of my vassals was laying a claim on the Western Roman Empire. So I had to get rid of him as quickly as possible. And at the same time, I wanted to take revenge on the other Germanic tribes and reconquer parts of my empire here as well. This war also went very well for me and I was on my way to winning it. I also had my first son. Octavius. That's my son. At last, I felt that the empire had regained some of its old strength. But it was not to stay that way. For real? And so another tragedy occurred with the death of Diodorus. He was only 20 years old and had already survived 16 years on the throne, only to have everything fall into chaos again. On top of that, the empire is still in the war of reconquest to restore its former glory. I was really annoyed by this murder, because I'd hoped to keep the empire stable with Diodorus for the time being. With his death, he left his son Octavius as emperor. However, he's only 0 years old and practically useless. I must manage to win the war and keep my vassals calm until he's old enough to influence them. Now it's time for Octavius to prove himself. I started bribing my vassals, and although they didn't hate me, it was difficult for me to raise their opinion significantly. At least they all don't hate me, so guess it's somehow okay. 5 opinion, 5 opinion. 22 opinion. Take that. 5 opinion is nothing. Besides, if I wasn't careful, I would get into trouble with the imperial laws again. But since there wasn't much I could do anyway, I decided to win the war as quickly as possible. With the change of rulers, I could no longer use my legions and praetorians. They would only be available, and 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 they would only be available. I can't speak English anymore. What's happening? They would only be available to me again in 5 years. Fortunately, they were not important for winning.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
Fortunately, they were not important for winning the war, but it did not take long for the first factions to form against the young Octavius. Oh, I just won everything. Why? Oh my god, for sure. It was him. 'Cause he also claimed the title. I just hate this guy. Can I murder him? Oh no, I need to be 14. 14 years. My main problem was that I could hardly do anything to avoid the war. Besides, I had to win my own war first, so I was under time pressure because I wasn't sure if I could win both wars at the same time. I decided to finish the war against the Germans first. Fortunately, I advanced quickly and was able to win the war in my favor. I now tried to form alliances with the strongest vassals through marriages, but unfortunately this did not succeed. My alliances with the Sassanids was also ended by the death of Diodorus, and this time I had no chance of negotiating a new one. Things got really dicey, however, when I noticed that another quite large faction with many powerful vassals had joined forces in the east. Fighting both vassal uprisings at the same time would be a nightmare, especially since I cannot even deploy my Praetorian Guard and my legions in the near future. It's hard enough for me to prevent one uprising. To prevent a second one under these circumstances is almost impossible. As I was not sure what to do now, I took a look at the cultures in my empire. Greek, yeah. Oh, Roman. Nice. Appreciate you, boys. But I could not find a solution that would stop my vassals from rebelling. And then the time had come. What? He just gets the whole empire. But when I saw their combined strength, I knew I could do it. For I had expected a much larger army. 6,000! It's nothing. Yet, I could not become overconfident. For if I lose this war, I would also lose the entire Western Empire. Okay. Where should I attack first? I decided to raise my army in Italy and then occupy the vassal there directly. Just as I was about to put this into action, the tide turned. The second faction had now also risen against me. Now it's getting interesting. So now I had to compete against both factions at the same time. I had to hope that I might be able to concentrate on one of the factions first, so I attacked my vassal in Italy as planned. During this, I realized that I could not lose against either faction without having dramatic consequences. My soldiers slowly made progress, and the first cities were conquered. But while the war in the west was going well, I was losing the war in the east even more. I realized that I had to fight on both fronts to win the war, but my army was not big enough for that. At least not without my legions, so I had to stall for time. Fortunately, the economy of the empire is now strong enough to support the army. Once again, the Roman Empire is in big trouble, and a defeat by one of the rebellious factions would mean massive losses. But when I looked at the map, I had to think about the crisis of the 3rd century and Aurelian's wars, because, like him, the West and Syria were rebelling at the same time. And in order to prevent the downfall of the Roman Empire, it was now necessary to win these wars. The Eastern faction had already won some war points, so I decided to take the risk and divide my army. The Pontic capital was not far from Constantinople, and I hoped that the conquest of their capital would bring me enough victory points to give me a little more control over these war. In addition, the enemy's main army was far away from the Pontic capital, which should enable me to attack without problems. My main army would conquer Dacia in the meantime, and then continue to support the army in the east. But now, it's time to execute the plan, or fail trying to do so. And so, I sent a third of my army to the east. At the same time, I was able to negotiate an alliance with the king of Arcet Campan. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Who could now come to my help with another 4,000 men. With the arrival of the small army in Constantinople, I hired additional mercenaries to strengthen the army. And so began the attack on Pontus. My main army in Italy also made good progress, and so I was able to start the attack on Dacia as well. It's important that I keep an eye on all the fronts, because if I'm not careful, my plan could fail. The first city in Pontus had fallen, and the Pontic capital was under siege. The enemy army had now also arrived in Pontus. But through the mercenaries and the support of my allies, I now had a small military advantage. I was also able to take control of the Pontic capital. In general, the war was now more and more on my side. My main army was now in the process of occupying Dacia completely. My council and my vassals were also quite fond of Octavius by now. In the east, it was now my goal to determine my supremacy and the course of the war through a decisive battle. In the meantime, however, there was a peasant uprising in Mediolanum, but that did not matter, because my legions were finally available again. Yes! I can hire my legion. Very good. And while the Praetorian Guard was on its way to the peasant uprising, the first battle started in the east, and I was able to win a first victory. The Praetorians easily defeated the peasant uprising, and could now also take care of the complete conquest of Dacia. where I had recently succeeded in occupying the capital. By now, well-trained enemy troops had gathered on the eastern front, and I needed reinforcements from Dacia in order to not run in the risk of losing the next battle. Another great battle was about to begin, but first, incredible news reached the young emperor and his advisors. The war's over! What? What happened? The time game had paid off, with the death of Severus Amorian. His claim to the Western Roman Empire was also over, and with it the war. With the end of the Western War, I could now send my entire army to the east. The first victories came quickly, and many cities were occupied or reconquered, until this war was also finally won. Oh God, yes! 6 years! And I managed it. Honestly, oh God, what a great feeling. Victory. Finally. But my armies were not going home yet. One last small war to help one of my allies still had to be won. But of course, after everything that had happened, this was no longer a problem. And so this war would also be won quickly after a few sieges. And the soldiers and legions could finally return home. And this is how it looked when the legions came home. And so, after a long time, there was peace in the empire. With the help of his advisors, Octavius had actually managed to save the empire from ruin. And so time passed, and through the good development, the empire achieved prosperity again. Finally, it was time for Octavius to marry, and thus secure the loyalty of one of the powerful vassals. I also took care of the further expansion of the infrastructure to make the empire even more economically stable. And after years of securing, it was time to continue the reconquest of Britain. Nevertheless, I wanted to approach the whole thing carefully. And also the last Germanic tribes were driven out of the empire. In addition, I wanted to protect the capital better, and so the Theodosian walls were built, which had a few more advantages. Okay, let's construct the Theodosian walls. And so that Octavius would not have the same end as Diodorus II, I replaced my spy master with the best there was at the count. Now that Octavius had won the civil war and a few other small wars, there was only one logical thing to do. And as they say, history repeats itself. And so it comes that Octavius, who by the way was born in the same month as Augustus, restores the Roman Empire and claims the title Augustus for himself. 1st of January 474. The Roman Empire, ladies and gentlemen, was re-established. You get the title Augustus, and this boy, I think we can all agree on this. This boy fucking deserved this title. He deserves it. Let's go. Been recognized as the rightful ruler of the restored Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was reunited, and now many tasks await the young emperor. He had made his goal to complete the reconquest of Britannia and thus complete the empire. And so I wasted no time in declaring war on Saxonia. And while the reconquest in Britain was starting, Octavius finally came of age. And his first free act was to reclaim Rome and make the Eternal City the capital of the empire again. At the same time, the Praetorians had to put down a peasant uprising in Italy. In Britannia, the war was in full swing, and although I was clearly superior, I had to accept some defeats. And so, the conquest of the first English territories took longer than expected. But in the end, I was able to win the war. Finally. By the way, this war lasted 7 years. That's longer than the Civil War in episode 10 of my series. Octavius by now was on the way to become a particularly skilled politician, with a focus on diplomacy. I was able to station new legions in the newly reconquered territories. I created a new one in the border territory, which will now assist me in defeating or attacking. So some time passed, and Octavius had his first daughter. In addition, a once very powerful nation, the Huns, had disappeared from the map. I just have to remember someone said like, oh, you have to ally with the Huns, and yeah, I would do it, but fortunately they're like gone. Some martyrs there, and that's like basically the Hunnic faction, but they're just gone. The Huns are gone. Maybe I will let's play as the Huns after the Roman Empire or something else, I don't know. I spent a lot of time developing and expanding the buildings to strengthen the economy. Now and then there was a small war. Likewise, the newly reconquered territories were often replaced by legions in order to build up a larger army that might one day be able to fight on several fronts at the same time. In addition, I improved my economy even more through trade notes. However, I set myself the rule that I could not improve them above level 50, because that would be completely overpowered. In the meantime, all the improvements and developments had driven the economy up, so I could once again take care of the reconquest of Britannia. And so another Britannic province was reconquered. And oh yes, I somehow completely forgot to mention that Octavius had got a son. Well, yeah, now you know it. The conquest of Britain had progressed very slowly so far, and so I decided to speed things up a bit and declared war on 3 tribes at the same time. The war went well, and every province I occupied became a new legionary camp. With enough legions in Britannia, I could quickly defeat future rebels. But without waiting long, I began to continue the expansion in Britannia, and my legions were a great help. The Britannian tribes could do hardly anything against my legions. And while the war in Britain was raging, Octavius had completed his first skill tree. I took care of the future development of my infrastructure while my legions occupied further parts of Britannia, and slowly but surely came closer to the goal of a Roman Britain. There were now 8 legions stationed in Britannia, which made the conquest much easier. And as usual, the available gold was invested in the expansion of the cities. After the conquest of Britain, my plan was to station legions in other border territories as well, especially on the border with Germania. But the legions also had another advantage. They had raised the military bar of the imperial laws, and I could now improve them to level 3, which gave me an incredible amount of military advantages. For example, plus 160% movement speed and an increase of the numbers and units of my available men-at-arms. The only downside was that I lost 85% of my levies, but that's more or less irrelevant with all the other units I now have. 15! Oh my god, this mechanic is just unbalanced as fuck. Oh my god. Oh my god, I love it. It was now possible for me to create incredibly large armies of men-at-arms and add to that the incredible speed. Just for the record, this is not edited. Oh, they're so fast. Oh my god. They're very fast. Holy shit. That's norm movement speed. Holy. Okay. The war I fought for my allies was won in no time. With this additional strength, I concentrated on Britain again, and fought against 5 tribes at the same time to reach my goal even faster. But while I had to accept defeats in the beginning, it was now easy to win the battles. Spread all over Britain, my legions and men-at-arms were victorious. And at the end of the war, Britain was almost back to the way it was before. And it didn't take much for me to reclaim all of Britain. But I was not the only one who had expanded. The Sassanid Empire had pushed all the way to India and was a danger to watch out for. The many conquests created more legions in Britain. Furthermore, it was important to me that my vassals in Britain shared my faith and were Romans, in order to be able to enforce my faith and my culture there. And the next time I looked at the decisions, it was clear to me that I was only 1 to 2 wars away from being able to officially reclaim Britannia. But before going to war, I strengthened my armies and improved my trade node in Egypt. But then, it was time to reclaim more land in Britain. And already the power of my legions alone was overwhelming for the enemy tribes. Battle after battle, I came closer to my goal. And even if it was not a flawless victory, it nevertheless left a clear message about the supremacy in Britain. Even parts of Ireland were conquered. After the victory, I increased my men-at-arms again to prepare for the final strike against Britannia. Octavius studied the doctrines of life, as he had still great plans for the future. In the meantime, the Roman faith had become dominant through the empire, and so Octavius decided to mend the great schism and unite all Christians under one faith. But Britain was yet not fully conquered, and another war ensued. Beyond that, Octavius consecrated his own bloodline and completed the first dynastic legacies. All this was to ensure that the future generations would have an easier inheritance and to protect the empire from collapse. This included choosing the right heir, and so I decided to disinherit my firstborn, as I felt my second son was more suited to ruling the empire. Now that the inheritance was secured, I entered the final part of the reconquest of Britain. My legions fought well, and after many battles and a long wait, I was finally able to officially reclaim Britannia. Okay. There it is. On the 7th July 523 AD, Britain was reclaimed by the Romans and is back in the empire. Yeah, now we're stronger than ever. We're taking back what rightfully belongs to us. This time we're not giving up on Britannia, because we will never have such crisis again. Oh my god. I mean, this guy is a legend. What he did for the empire, that's just amazing. So it was done. Britain was finally back in the Roman Empire, and Octavius finished the task that Honorius had started. Now that the Roman Empire regained its former greatness, it was time to hold on to it. But Octavius wouldn't be Octavius if he were satisfied with the reconquest of Britannia, and so he made use of his right of inheritance. As a son of a Persian emperor's daughter, he had a claim on the entire Persian Empire. Okay, here we go. The Persian Empire was politically unstable and involved in many civil wars. Octavius had realized this and used the current weakness of the Persian Empire to his advantage. Now it was time to send all the troops to Persia in order to capture the empire for Rome. But Octavius was not the only one who wanted the empire, which is why the Persian rebels also posed a potential threat to the Romans. But the Roman armies made rapid progress, conquering one city after another. The battles were also won, and Persia was simply overrun. The victory against the Persian Empire, it is completed. And so Octavius, the saver and restorer of the Roman Empire, succeeded in completely conquering Persia after the reconquest of Britannia. For the most of the inhabitants of the empire, he was thus officially luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan. Rome was bigger and more powerful than ever before, except for a few smaller vassals. Hello there! All of Persia was now subject to Rome. This also meant that Rome had conquered all potential enemies, so that there was hardly any danger from outside the borders. But the greatest danger now came from within their own ranks, and it would take a long time before Persia would completely bow to Roman rule. With the great conquest of Persia, my vassal limit was extended, and so I created new king titles to counteract this. And because I felt a little sorry for my firstborn son, whom I had disinherited, I gave him the kingdom of Britannia. To counteract rebellions and uprisings, I quickly began to convert the Persian kings to my faith. And I was very successful with my approach, and the first Christian regions quickly formed in Persia. I was quite sure that after Octavius' death, riots would break out, and so I decided to use the time to conquer Hayastan. Besides, the empire just looks a lot nicer when there is not another country in it. The war was easy for me, but as I had already feared, the first revolts were not long in coming. And so, there were some factions that wanted to revolt, but I managed to calm them down and avoid a war, at least for the time being. In Ireland, I was attacked by tribes at the same time, but thanks to my legions, I was able to fight them off without any problems. Meanwhile, Britannia was once again completely at a civil war. I don't think I've ever had a campaign where that didn't happen. I don't know. In the course of time, there was a peasant uprising. Peasant uprising again. Okay, where is it? Here it is. Oh, it's a huge peasant uprising. Let's see. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's a huge peasant uprising. But I was able to end it quickly. Oh, that was a short peasant uprising. A lot of time went by and I concentrated a lot on developing the empire and avoiding civil wars. Roman culture also began to spread more widely. To support this, I started to educate the children of the greatest kings of the empire and make them into little Romans, so that they could later spread the Roman culture in their kingdoms. Thus, there was a long period of peace and development. But it was not to last forever, for Octavius authorized further expansionist wars. The imperial laws were now all at the highest level, and I hadn't really worried about them for a long time. Despite the considerable strength of the empire, there were still invasions from smaller nations. They actually declared war against me. What? What? Okay. But they were simply too military inferior to pose a threat. Octavius was now in his 70s, and many advisors advised him to rest and relax as he had achieved enough. But Octavius responded that as long as he was alive, the empire should expand. And so he launched a major offense against the Mervian kingdom. But during the conquest, Octavius felt that he did not have much time left, and he was proved right. No. Oh, he couldn't bring his last war to an end. There it is. The end of maybe one of the greatest emperors in the whole series. And so Octavius died of old age at the age of 79 years without being able to finish his war. I personally found the epilogue of Octavius here is not exactly justified for such an emperor. For this reason, I will leave the task of summoning up his life story to you guys. I will take up the best points in the next video. Welcome. In memories of our Emperor Octavius, the best writers of the empire have produced epilogues in his honor, which have finally been unified to a final one. Imperator Octavius had with great remorse been laid to rest. Rome, the eternal city, For centuries it was thought to be lost to the untold millions of barbarians coming from the east, yet it stands stalwart, stronger than ever. The entire empire weeps for a man who brought an empire from the brink of ruin and increased its splendor of 100-fold. He was a great man who will be hailed by Romans for centuries. The greatest of his many feats were the reunification of the imperial thrones, the reconquest of Rome, and the conquest of Persia. Handling successions with great ambitions, he conquered managing the realms in ways never seen before, spreading Christianity to those who needed enlightenment, and that and 1,000 reasons more why history knows him as Octavius the Great. Octavius was a man known for many things, but when asked what he wanted to be called, he replied, "Call me Roman, the title which I am the proudest, and the one that I am the least deserving. But all great men must die. Rest in peace, Imperator Octavius the Great. May you be loved by Christ like you were loved by your people." Due to the death of Octavius, Marcianus ascends the throne and is declared the new emperor of the Roman Empire. But he has to follow in big footsteps, and it is to be expected that his father's successes will forever overshadow him. Like his father, Marcianus was a skilled politician and therefore had no difficulty in bribing angry vassals. And so many years passed while the new emperor tried to bring peace and order back into the troubled empire. To a large extent, he was successful in its efforts to keep the empire stable and to continue Octavius' projects in case of development. And yet, despite all his efforts, a peasant uprising occurred. But the peasants had no chance against the Roman army and were mercilessly defeated. Like his father, Marcianus wanted to prove himself as a great and strong emperor in the war, and so he launched the first war of expansion against a neighboring kingdom. Thanks to the Roman army, he was able to achieve a decisive victory. Now it remains to be seen whether he can achieve the same great successes as his father or remain in his shadow. Some time has passed since Marcianus took over the empire from his father, and after winning his last war, he was about to fight another one. The aim is to recapture former territories of the empire that were lost through expansions of the Germanic tribes. The war was successful, and one tribe after another was conquered. Marcianus started liking his little wars of expansion, and so he began to further subjugate Ireland in order to better protect the island against constantly invading barbarians. In general, Marcianus succeeded in keeping the people calm and expanding the Roman borders, even if only slightly. But these were still no successes worth mentioning, and so Marcianus looked for something that no one had done before him. He also made sure that only administrators with Roman culture and Roman faith were appointed in newly conquered territories. This should help to spread the Roman faith and especially the Roman culture in new provinces. After much deliberations, Marcianus decided to do something that no other emperor had ever considered before. He wanted to expand further into Africa, and so he launched the first war against the kingdom of Ghana. Ghana was dominant in the western part of Africa, but could hardly do anything against the Roman legions. But due to the harsh conditions and the weather, the war was protracted. However, Marcianus became more and more confident of a Roman Africa and began to commission many new buildings in Africa in order to promote development there. The long war in Africa was seen by some tribes as opportunity to attack Rome, but they underestimated the Roman power and were beaten back without mercy. After all the wars, Marcianus decided to dedicate himself again to the development of new and until now rather less developed provinces. Money did not play a role for him anyway, due to the preparatory work of Octavius. Nevertheless, peace did not last long, cause after a short time he was already looking for a new conquest. Marcianus also ordered the enlargement of the army. Besides the war, he also made sure that the Christian faith was spread in Persia. And so time passed. Again and again there were small wars. But in the course of time, Marcianus neglected more and more the administration of his vassals. This caused quite a bit of chaos, and many parts of the population were annoyed. But Marcianus did not let this distract him from his goals, and decided, despite the troubled times, to achieve another success, which has not yet been achieved by anyone else. His goal, the complete conquest of Britannia. And after a quick and brutal war, Britannia was for the first time under full Roman control. And yeah, with that, England is completely in Roman control. Britannia is now completely under Roman control, but due to poor administration, there have been some uprisings. Okay, where the enemy troops? Oh, quite large. However, the Roman war machine is now simply too strong, and there is nearly nothing that can stop it. But the uprising was a lesson to Marcianus, and he spent more time administrating the empire.
Money talks.
Here comes the money. Money, money,
Oh. And so it came to pass that Marcianus died at the age of 85 from complications related to obesity. With Marcianus' death, Aurelius now ascends the throne, and the first signs indicate that he will be a good emperor. However, he is not a diplomat, which will make it much more difficult for me to bribe angry vassals. And so it came to pass that factions quickly formed against the new emperor. Aurelius did his best, but could not avert a vassal uprising. This was the first vassal revolt in almost 100 years. Nevertheless, I was still military superior to them. But I also had 2 smaller defensive wars going, and so it was time to send all available legions into the war. With all available units, I had an army size of 50,000 men. But most of my army was in Britain, and it would take some time for my main forces to reach the insurgents. Little by little, I managed to beat back my vassals. Aurelius. That's a good name, I guess. One by one, the last enemy armies were defeated, and Aurelius was able to celebrate his first great victory. Now that the empire was stable again for the time being, it was important to maintain this stability to ensure that something like this would not happen again. After a few years of peace, I had set myself the goal of integrating the remaining small territories and kingdoms, which still exist independently in the middle of the empire, to the empire. In addition, it should make clear to the neighboring powers that the Roman Empire was in no way weakened by the civil war. Persia had become almost completely Christian, which meant fewer revolts. In the years to come, smaller wars followed again and again, which also embellished the borders somewhat. But Aurelius' power consisted mainly of civil progress. He provided many new buildings and cities throughout the empire, and Roman culture also achieved many new explorable innovations under his rule. Many new legions were created in the conquered frontier areas, as these had proven to be very useful in crisis situations. Persia was almost entirely Roman, with only a few isolated tribes resisting the Roman Empire. However, Aurelius' attention was also focused on Ireland, which had not yet been completely conquered. By attacking the remaining Irish tribes, almost the entire island was now under Roman control. However, I always had to be careful, cause Elaine is not the best diplomat, and this almost led to a second great civil war. But fortunately, I was able to prevent worse, and the period of peace followed, and my main goal was to spread Roman culture more. But with such a large empire, constant vigilance is required, because during a border conflict with Germanic tribes, a small kingdom managed to seize its freedom, which of course I could not allow. But if I do not pay attention in the future, this can have even worse consequences. In addition, for years there has been constant danger of civil war, which until now has always just been prevented. So time passed, and my efforts to spread the Roman culture slowly showed progress. But Aurelius still wanted to make a name for himself through a glorious conquest, like many other emperors, and so he launched an invasion of the kingdom of Ghana. The war was quick and painless. Aurelius then set off for Germania to conquer a few indomitable tribes once and for all. But unfortunately, he could not complete his mission. Emperor Aurelius is dead, and his son Aurelius II now ascends the throne. I was very glad that he was a good diplomat, because that made it easy for me to bribe my vassals. After I had completed the most important preparations, I returned to the war. And shortly after the beginning of my reign, I had my first son. However, I had a little trouble finding a fitting name for him. The wars in Germania were over for the time being, but the young emperor had no time to rest, for new conflicts had broken out in the east. The conflicts could fortunately be resolved quickly, as they were not really about me but between two of my vassals. Oh my god! Egypt has become huge! What? What? Oh my god. Okay. Now that peace had been restored, Aurelius was mainly concerned with spreading Roman culture. Time went by like that. Every now and then my armies had to move out to repel invading Germanic tribes, but otherwise it was a quiet time without much war. I used the quiet times to negotiate alliances and construct buildings. One wedding in particular has stayed in my memory. I mean, what happened here? Oh man, like it's so funny.
All around me are familiar faces.
While I was managing my empire, I noticed that a small group of islands has managed to become independent. And yeah, of course, I could not allow that. So I made short work of them and integrated them in the empire. I now decided to conquer the remaining factions in Persia as well. And during the war, well, how can I explain this? Well, see for yourself. What? Wait, what? Oh, are they... what? What? Oh, okay. So, are you telling me my army started like just shortly running out of the map to come back to conquer the city? What? Okay, no. What? Okay, that's a weird bug. Let's see what happens. Wait a minute. Is my army is disappearing? What? Why? Okay, and now? What should I do now? My army is... oh, it's back. It's back. Okay. So, they like... Oh. Oh, okay. Okay, all good, all good. Everything's fine. The bug is gone? Hopefully? I think so. So, everything should be fine again. Okay, yeah, never mind. Yeah. Okay, yeah, nice. Oh, nice, perfect. Okay, that was a weird. What just happened? Okay. Luckily, it was only a bug, and my armies didn't really run to the end of the world. That would have been pretty annoying. The next goal was the complete conquest of Ireland. Militarily, it was not a great triumph, but Aurelius had finally finished what Honorius had started, and Octavius had continued on a grand scale. Both islands were now finally completely conquered. Now that Britain and Ireland had been completely conquered, I was faced with the question of how the future of the Roman Empire should look. First, I decided to conquer the last free people in Persia. Then I thought about possibly penetrating deeper into Germanic territories. It was important to Aurelius to be personally present at the conquest in Persia, but things went differently than planned.
Bruh.
And so he became the first emperor of the new empire to lose a war because he was taken prisoner. Ashamed of the embarrassing defeat, he decided to not fight any more wars for the time being. Only after some time, he did send his armies back to the front. His goal was to expand into Germanic territorium. Since the Germanic tribes were all isolated and in conflict with each other, it was easy for me to conquer them. Due to the successes in Germania, Aurelius had found the courage to try his hands as a competent commander again. And so he ordered the conquest of the kingdom of Albacia, or however it's pronounced. But, like many before him, he did not live to see the end of this war. With Aurelius dead, another emperor has died. I don't think my powerful vassals have ever been as happy with me as these ones, without influencing them. But unfortunately, not all my vassals were so happy with me.
Hello there.
And I had to be careful that it did not come to a civil war. After all the organizational matters were settled for the time being, it was back to the war, which I won easily after conquering the enemy capital. After I had successfully ended the war, I took care of the administration and the promotion of the Roman culture. But also the next war should not wait long. After the war, there were peasant uprisings. Normally, I would have used my Praetorian Guard in such a case, because it would be the quickest on the spot. However, I had to realize that it was no longer there. Probably the province was conquered by another vassal or something. My men-at-arms were still in Africa because of the last war, and so I decided to use the rest of my army against the peasant uprising. But shortly afterwards, a Norwegian tribe called the Vestergötland declared war on me. They had waited well for the situation because my armies were spread out and it would take some time until my men-at-arms would arrive in the battle area. The enemy target were lands in Spain, and I did not wait long and sent my legions there to defend the coast of Spain. However, the Nordic armies were faster than my legions, but my legions still arrived quickly enough to disrupt their sieges. In the battle that followed, my legions managed to capture the enemy commander and force the surrender, and so calmer times returned. My next goal was to completely conquer the Arabian Peninsula. In the meantime, one of my vassals laid a claim on my emperor title, and because I did not want to risk a dangerous war, I set in motion an assassination plot against him. By then, the war against the last Arabian kingdom had been won, and the whole peninsula was under Roman control. In the following years, nothing much happened. I built buildings, and every now and then there was a minor war at the various borders of the empire. But then, in 627 AD, Flavius dared to take the step of attacking Antioch. the last Persian nation, the same people his father had failed so miserably to conquer. Flavius, however, succeeded with ease, and so the last Persian nation was now under Roman rule. So Flavius had managed to take revenge for his father's death. But this victory was only partly good for him. He withdrew more and more from public life, and the administration of the Imperium was neglected. From time to time, he attacked smaller nations who plundered the empire, but otherwise it remained quiet around him. One last time, he put himself together and did what some had already thought possible in Octavius' time. He dared the first advance into Indian territory. But then, he withdrew for good. He only occasionally made sure that his son Victorius was halfway prepared for his new position. He declared war for the last time, knowing that he would not live to see it. And so ends the story of Flavius Theodosius, who handed over the empire to his son during the war, believing that every good emperor should begin his reign by winning a war. And so the faith of the Roman Empire is now in the hands of Victorius. He is blessed by birth with an incredible intelligence, but some are skeptical about him being in power. He himself is an incredible fan of Aurelius and Octavius. He has often expressed the wish that the people should regard them as gods, and so he had drawn up his own plan of how he imagined his reign and how he would manage to immortalize the two of them forever. However, it was not easy with him because he was greedy and became extremely stressed when he gave away money or titles. Nevertheless, he did it to please his vassals, as many of them did not like him. Besides, he now had to continue to fight his father's war. After spending about 20 minutes on this, I managed to resolve all the factions against Victorius. Oh god. Victorius did not pay much attention to his vassals, as long they did not cause him any problems, and so the kingdom of Gaethia was able to free itself from Roman rule. And so many felt he was not suitable. For a long time he did nothing and shut himself off. But through the meeting with many priests, many speculated that he wanted to reform the religion. And so it was. Only a few months later, a new faith was introduced. The new religion was called Octavianism and was designed especially for war. With the introduction of Octavianism, a new age of conquest was to dawn in the Roman Empire. At least that was Victorius' plan. Of course, he knew that his new faith would also meet with some resistance, but the extent of the resistance would make him fearful, as more and more provinces joined together to rebel against the new faith. And I could do nothing but watch the peasant uprising grow bigger and bigger. I've never seen such a big peasant uprising before. I'm a bit scared, to be honest. 110. And so, in the year 679 AD, there was a peasant uprising in which 162 provinces took part. Together, they amounted to a strength of 175,000 men. Yep, that's pretty intense, even if they're just peasants. Okay, now it's time to use everything I have. My plan now was to split my army. My men-at-arms would fight in Persia, and the rest of my army would be sent out from Constantinople, while my legions would keep order in Britannia and the other frontier areas. And maybe I could send my holy oh no, wait. But Victorius had made a huge mistake in planning his new religion. For the new religion had banned and destroyed all legions and imperial laws. Oh my god, what? What? Oh my god, what have I done? What? I didn't knew I would destroy all my legions. Everything is gone, even the imperial laws. When I realized that I no longer had any legions and imperial laws, and that I had lost all the advantages of these, I understood that the situation was much more dangerous than I had assumed. Now the war had to be won somehow, but I had fewer troops than they did, and on top of that, all the bonuses from the imperial laws no longer existed. I realized that my men-at-arms alone would take far too long to put down the uprising, and so I decided to hire additional mercenaries. My soldiers fought well, but there were just too many of them. Slowly but surely, I was losing the war. But when all seemed lost, one army managed to win a victory, which gave me hope again. But the longer the war lasted, the more expensive it became. Because without the bonuses of the imperial laws, I was losing 350 gold a month. At first, not really bad for the empire, but in the long run, this could be a real danger. Slowly but surely, my soldiers gained the upper hand and managed to capture the enemy leader in Africa. The greatest uprising in the history of the new Roman Empire had been overcome. And I made sure that a new holy order was immediately established. But only 2 years later, the check was to be repeated. A new peasant uprising with 109 members declared war on me. Especially Gaul, Egypt and Persia were very unhappy with the new religion, which is why there was the greatest resistance in these areas. Once again, I needed to hire mercenaries to be able to somehow defend such a huge empire. Things again looked bad for me, but once again I managed to regain the upper hand and capture the enemy leader in Africa. The people revered and feared Octavius at the same time because of his deeds, but because he almost always acted to his advantage and still survived wars and crises like this, he was nicknamed the Devil Emperor by the people, because he was feared by his followers as well as his enemies. But I did not have much time to recover, for a new uprising requires my attention. Meanwhile, however, the uprisings were no longer as dangerous and large as they used to be, and so this one too was successfully defeated. Octavianism was now gaining ground everywhere and was slowly displacing the old Christian faith. Due to many uprisings, the empire was in chaos. Victorius did his best to hold back the rebellions, but was only partially successful. Again and again, his armies had to go out and keep order. All the protests caused Victorius to go mad and even banished his wife to prison. In the short times of peace, new building projects were launched, but the time had come for Victorius. At the age of 79, he finally died of old age, but he left behind what was probably the greatest crisis in a long time. For his religion had not only abolished the legions and imperial laws, but also the sole right of inheritance of the eldest son. Due to the new inheritance rule, the empire had broken into 3 parts after the death of Victorius. A new Britannic Empire and the Persian Empire had formed under the leadership of Titus' brothers and were now acting independently of each other. This was a disaster for the empire, and if nothing changed, this event could be repeated countless times. Fortunately, there was a competent official who immediately proposed a solution to normalize the law of succession. Titus, however, rejected this proposal because he believed that this new law was wanted by the gods and ensured that the emperors should choose their successors more carefully. Titus now had the task of removing the chaos his father had caused. Since he was a good diplomat, it was easy for me to influence my vassals, and the empire was politically stable for the time being. But there was no time to rest, for the empire was at war with the Persian nation of Dailam, which had gained fame in the empire through its victory against Iolanus II. But Titus could not bear any defeat, so he mercilessly razed one city after another to the ground. He then turned his attention to the new British Empire, which was ruled by his younger brother Nicholas. Fortunately, he was only 8 years old, so one murder would be enough to bring the empire titles back into Titus' control. After the second attempt, the murder of Nicholas was successful, and Britain was now part of the Roman Empire again. Yes. Perfect. Really good. But with the reconquest, the empire was now at war with 3 factions who had made war on Britain. But worse was to come, because only a little later there was a peasant uprising, which took place mainly in Spain. But since more armies had already been raised in other border areas, Titus, like victorious before him, had to resort on mercenaries to defend the empire. Slowly but surely, Titus was able to win the defensive wars. Only the peasant uprising did not look good. But in the end, this could be ended with the death of the enemy leader. But all these wars and uprisings slowly showed their effect. The wealth of the empire sank dramatically, and so Titus only had 71,000 gold left. But at the times of Victorious, about 30 years ago, the empire still had almost 300,000 gold. But Titus could not and did not want a great financial recovery, because the next task was to reconquer Persia. Fortunately, the Persian Empire had not yet been able to accumulate great wealth, and the army wasn't exactly scary either. Before I do anything else, where's their capital? Down here? What? Why would you... never mind. Okay. I divided my army to make faster progress, because the only thing that could really bother me was the length of the war and the cost that it would entail. But it was not to remain just one war, because once again a peasant uprising broke out. While the conquest of Persia made great progress, it was once again the peasant uprising that caused me problems. Without mercenaries, the empire would have fallen long ago. Eventually, I won the war against the Persian Empire, and the territories that had once been conquered by Octavius were once again in Roman opposition. And after a final battle, the peasant uprising was also defeated. But the empire had not yet regained its full size, because in Africa another empire title was controlled by Titus' brother Ulfin. But first, the last kingdom in Lower East Africa was subjugated, as this people kept invading Roman provinces. Now Titus only had to conquer the empire of Libya, and he would have restored the whole empire. But shortly after the declaration of war against Libya, Titus died, and was never able to finish his conquest. Despite his successes, he was not the most popular emperor, and money management was not one of his strong points. Nevertheless, it was clear to everyone that he had almost managed to end the crisis of the 7th and 8th century. But the task now passed to his son Titus II. Titus II put a lot of emphasis on the administration of the empire, but he was also able to win the war against Libya, and thus end the crisis of the 7th and 8th century. In addition, new laws were enacted which forbade the granting of land or titles to cultures that were not Roman. In addition, he ensured the construction of many buildings in the empire and took great care of the future emperors. And so peace returned to the empire. The empire is now united again, but a small part of the only crisis still remains. The kingdom of Asia is the last remnant of the former kingdom of Gethia, which had gained its freedom during the reign of Victorius. Titus did not hesitate and immediately began the reconquest of the only Roman territory. Besides the war, Roman culture has spread greatly and was now to be found in Italy, Gaul, Greece, and even Britannia and Germania. Kind of funny, because Britannia was actually the part of the real Roman Empire that never really became Roman. A second region in Egypt, right? Yeah, nice. Perfect. Just took like 200 years, but okay. Octavianism was now dominant almost everywhere in the empire, especially in Persia and Central Africa. Titus had also set out to turn the Grecian culture, which was dominant in the east, into a Roman one, something that was considered impossible by many. Nothing much happened over the next few years, and Titus ensured that the empire's treasury was slowly but surely replenished. Meanwhile, other factions in the north began to expand, and many there hoped for a united Scandinavia, strong enough to counter the Roman superiority. Titus' response to these rumors for the north was a large-scale invasion of the neighboring tribes to show that Rome had nothing to fear. But during the wars in Germania, a peasant revolt broke out in Spain and some other provinces, as many there still wished for the old faith to return. In general, Spain had to struggle the most with uprisings and civil wars. Bit by bit, I fought my way through the wars in Germania and the peasant uprising. But for the first time in a long time, I did not have to hire mercenaries to defend the empire. This was the best proof that the crisis was over and Rome was now moving towards a better time. Through his many successes, Titus had gained a lot of respect in Rome. In the next few years, some smaller conquests followed in Africa, but otherwise it was peaceful in the Roman Empire, and also the plundering of Germanic tribes had subsided. The development in the west of the empire surpassed all other parts of the world, and presented proudly the progress of Roman culture. Is there still something with zero over here? Zero development. Oh man. Titus had managed to give the people new hope after the crisis of the 7th century. Too soon. With Titus' death on the 25th October 736 AD, a part of the stability in the empire also disappeared, cause Caecilius was crowned the new emperor. However, he was not yet of age, and thus the first emperor since Octavius to ascend the throne before reaching his majority. Therefore, my biggest task now was to keep the empire stable and to prevent uprisings, which worked surprisingly well, and for the next 10 years there was peace in the empire, except for a smaller border conflict with Germania. I mean, where else if not there? In the meantime, Caecilius had become an adult, which made the administration of the empire much easier. He had also strengthened the Theodosian bloodline. Furthermore, he took care of the expansion of the infrastructure in the northern provinces. The people gave Celsius credit for the period of peace, but he also wanted to prove himself on the battlefield, and so he launched an invasion on the remaining West African tribes, which had no chance against the Roman superiority. But once again, the war caused a peasant rebellion to break out. But Celsius was able to end the wars in Africa before the peasant revolt broke out, so it was no longer a major threat. After the uprising, I continued to focus on the expansion and administration of the empire. Getting some parts of France, oh my god, I don't know how to pronounce France. You know what I mean. In the meantime, there was another peasant uprising, but it was defeated without any problems. The desire for a Roman Africa grew ever greater in Caecilius, and so he called for another war to bring the last free African tribes under Roman control. The war was won quickly and without any problems, thanks to the strength of the Roman armies. The only problem was the cost of the armies, because since the crisis of the 7th century, the empire could no longer build on its former financial prosperity, and if a war went longer than expected, it could have serious consequences for the empire. But right now, the empire was stable, with only occasional peasant uprisings requiring my attention from time to time. And over time, Octavianism had spread throughout the empire. Only the upper African provinces were reluctant to adopt the faith. In the meantime, Caecilius was getting closer to his goal of a Roman Africa, for not much was missing until Africa would be under complete Roman control. But India was not to be spared either, and so Caecilius launched an invasion of Indian territory after the African War. In Caecilius' opinion, the whole world was to be run by Rome. However, this was his last great quotation, for he died of obesity only a short time later. But his wish for a Roman world domination lived on through his son and the Roman people. Due to the death of Emperor Caecilius, Emperor Augustinus ascends the throne. Now, things were about to change in Rome, for Augustinus had already a fixed goal in mind. His plan was to conquer the whole world for the honor of Rome, just as his father had wanted. Not everyone in Rome wanted to support Augustinus' plan, but due to his diplomatic skills, he was able to quickly defeat his enemies in the Senate. As a last preparation, he went on a pilgrimage to ask the gods Aurelius and Octavius for strength so that his plan would succeed. Now it should begin. His first goal was to further expansion into Asia. The wars were successful and new lands were conquered. However, Augustinus was very susceptible to stress, and so he found relaxation in hurting himself. Augustinus was already preparing for his next campaign when news reached him that a new faith was spreading in Africa, which could cause rebellions in the future if it continued to spread so rapidly. To the best of his knowledge, Augustinus slowed down the spread of the religion but had to propose his expeditions. In India, however, the king of Kosala made further conquests in the name of Rome, and thus created a great kingdom and supremacy in India. After Augustinus had taken care of the problem with the new religion, he began again with the further conquest, this time in Africa, to finally make the continent completely Roman. There were many battles, but the legions... Oh, no, wait, they don't exist anymore. But the Roman troops remained brave, and a united Africa under Roman rule was within reach. So a final plan was drawn up to conquer all of Africa, but it could not longer be carried out. Imperator Augustinus of the Roman Empire has found peace in crisis embrace at 44 years of age. Oh my god, oh my god. The thing is, he was 44. I thought like I had like 30 to 40 years left. He was thought, okay, I don't have oh my god, what should I, oh my god, the first child emperor since Octavius, Imperator Romanus. Due to the sudden death of Augustinus, his only son Romanus was crowned emperor at the age of 9. Now the question was whether he would be able to hold the empire together despite his young age. Romanus, however, was surprisingly popular and did not have any major problems at first, and so he was able to concentrate on the expansion of cities and monasteries. Furthermore, through his father, he had understood the desire for conquest which emanated from the Roman people, and so he decided to advance into one of the most northern parts of the known world in order to connect the north and the south of the world. It was a long war which was not easy for Roman troops due to the harsh temperatures, but in the end, Rome was able to triumph. And so Romanus, despite his young age, already achieved a great deal of respect through his sharp understanding. But his success was not enough for Romanus, for Africa had not yet been completely conquered. Another successful campaign followed, and now there was only one small kingdom left before Africa was completely conquered. Romanus also decided to marry when he grew up, but it was not a political marriage to create an alliance, but one of love. But even love could not stop his will to conquer, and so a campaign to present-day China followed. And as Romanus was, he managed to remain undefeated until now. In the meantime, Africa had completely converted to Octavianism. In Italy, there was one last province that had kept the old Christian faith until now. In the north, the desire for a united Scandinavia slowly began to take shape, and Romanus did not hesitate for long to show Roman presence in the north through further conquests. But the Nordic tribes showed strong resistance, and so Romanus had to accept his first defeat there towards the end of the war. Nevertheless, he won the war clearly, but that was not the only success, for by now, all of Africa in the south was under Roman rule. But an even greater danger emanated from Sweden, which grew stronger every day, and which was better not to underestimate. Africa is conquered, and Rome is greater than ever before. But in the north, a new empire has also emerged. Under the leadership of Håkon Gunnarsson, or however he is pronounced, Sweden is on the way to becoming an empire, But despite the new threat, Romanus continued to pursue his plan and launched a new invasion into the northern and unexplored territories. The experienced Roman soldiers made short work of the enemy, but then my game crashed. Yep, that was a bit annoying. But anyway, even if I had to play the war again, the result was the same. But Romanus wasted no time, and more wars were declared, this time against northern tribes. But the more northern it became, the greater the resistance. And so it was not an easy victory. In the meantime, Roman culture had even spread to Germania. But also in other parts of the world, the Roman culture became more and more dominant. Even up here in India and in Africa, everywhere it's blopping up. It's perfect. Now that the north was more and more conquered, Romanus looked to India, which was still mostly unconquered. But with a great campaign, Romanus wanted to change that. And so, the India campaign began. At first, I had to accept a somewhat embarrassing and avoidable defeat. Yes, I know. I have to raise my troops further away. Yeah. India was no easy opponent, but outnumbered. In addition, the Roman military under Romanus was well coordinated due to the many campaigns. And so, in the end, India had to bow to the power of Rome. India was now clearly under Roman rule, and if it continued, it would not be long before all of India was occupied by Rome. As Romanus made further war plans against the north, it became clear that Sweden was seeking more power than had been assumed. Oh my god! Romanus used this opportunity to make further conquests in the north. Through all the chaos, it was possible to take more land into Roman possession. After that, peace returned to the empire, and I took care of the administration. I also procured a new county in India, but under Romanus' rule, there was not to be long peace, for he did not hesitate to wage further wars, and so Rome grew constantly. And the first dared to compare Romanus' deeds with those of Octavius. I found it surprising how the Egyptian kingdom had lasted so long without collapsing completely, but it was to my advantage, as they spreaded Roman culture. But Hayastan, which was conquered by Octavius back then, had also gained influence within the empire. The threat from Sweden was growing, and Romanus was planning further wars against the Nordic tribes. So, a confrontation was slowly becoming inevitable. But before it could happen, problems in India required my attention. But the problems in India were not the worst. It turned out that Romanus had been suffering from cancer for several years, and yet he was doing fine, and you could hardly tell that he was seriously ill. Romanus commissioned several building projects before he returned to continue his war in India, but India was still weakened from the last campaign, and so the Roman armies had an easy game with the Indian troops. No sooner had Romanus finished the war in India than he had his next goal. This time he wanted to conquer Mongolia, and after one successful campaign, apart from Sweden, there was hardly anyone who stood a chance against Rome. While Romanus continued to wage wars against the last Indian kingdoms and tribes, disrupting news came from the north. For Sweden had conquered almost all the other free tribes and was now, with an army of 42,000 men, a serious opponent for the Roman Empire. But Romanus still paid little attention to Sweden and continued to wage war in what is now China. But as tradition would have it, Romanus died while at war. Romanus died of cancer at the age of 84 and passed on the throne to his son Augustinus II. And even with his 75 years on the throne, Octavius was still the emperor who reigned the longest of all emperors. Augustinus had great plans. First, he ended the current war, but his next target was Sweden. But he also considered whether he should lead the empire back to the original Roman faith. Augustinus' first actions consisted of calming vassals and smashing a small rebellion in India. But once that was done, he turned his attention to the Swedish threat.
They're raiding me, okay. Interesting.
I had a much larger army, but underestimating them could end badly for me. And so the first battles came, and slowly the first cities fell under my control. And with the conquest of the capital, Sweden was defeated. Now, I only had to defeat one Swedish vassal, which was no problem, of course. Now that Sweden was also defeated, Augustinus set about his next great project, which was a world conquest. And so, one war after another was declared, and countless towns and villages were conquered by the Roman troops. I also noticed a small island kingdom that had so far been spared from Roman rule,
Hello there.
but only so far.
I need help.
Time passed while Augustinus won more and more wars, but he still had not started his great goal to change the Roman religion again. So he died without fully realizing his plans. Now Emperor Magnus ascends the throne, who first took care of new building projects, and so the first universities were established under his rule, to open the door for more knowledge for every young Roman citizen. But the next war against the Swedes, who never recovered from their defeat by Augustinus, also began. But just as I had started the war, I noticed something incredible. What? No way. The return of the Hunnic Empire? No. What? That's a joke, right? Oh my god. I couldn't explain how or why they were suddenly back, but yeah, they just appeared out of nowhere. Unfortunately, they will probably disappear as quickly as they came, because they are currently at war with one of my vassals. But back to the war in Sweden. Sweden had no chance against the Roman superiority, but they suffered such a crushing defeat that they would probably never recover. As I looked for the Huns after the war, they had already been conquered.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Now I had nothing and no one to fear. Magnus ordered more wars and took care of the succession. And so the years passed. More great expansions into the eastern territories were undertaken. Especially the last Indian nations proved to be serious opponents, but in the end, Rome triumphed. Over time, the rest of the Swedish Empire was broken into many pieces, and Magnus decided to conquer all of Sweden, at least what's left of it. But soon after his victory, he died, and Emperor Aurelius ascended the throne. Like his father, he launched an attack on the northern territories, and so the last remnants of the map slowly turned red. Aurelius could almost admire a world conquest in his old age. But it was not to be so easy, because my next opponent was more or less myself. Besides my main goal, the conquest of the world, I spent just as much time keeping the empire and my vassals calm. For I was determined to prevent my empire from splintering a second time and repeating the crisis of the 7th century. My main interest, however, remained the war. India had been almost completely conquered by now, and only one last small kingdom dared to oppose me. Further expeditions were undertaken to the north to conquer the last remnants of the Swedish Empire. After that, I took care of the development of Rome. I mean, I haven't done that for a very long time. Anyway, because Rome now has an income of 100,000 gold per month.
Wait a minute.
100,000 gold.
more conquests followed. But at the age of 92, Aurelius died and handed over the empire to his son, Jesus. Yeah. Jesus was very careful about his new position. Bro, I can't take that seriously. Why is he called? Oh man, Jesus is going to conquer the world with the Roman troops. With Roman troops. What's happening here? Oh man. Jesus did not want war, but in the current religion, war was important, and so the people became more and more unhappy. And so, I was indirectly forced to quickly lead more wars. At least I had to expect riots, if I didn't. And so it was inevitable that I would have to change the religion one last time. But if I did that, there was a danger that I would be attacked by other smaller factions at the same time, or that vassal uprisings would break out in the empire. So my plan now was to conquer the world first, before changing the religion. So as the next step, the Mongol Empire was invaded. And I came to the eastern edge of the known world for the first time. In the meantime, Roman culture had spread all the way to Spain. But suddenly Jesus died, and his son, who was cursed with a dread disease, ascended the throne. More wars broke out, and battle after battle the Roman soldiers conquered new territories. The level of development was also high throughout the empire, at least in those parts that had been integrated for a long time. With victory in further wars, the world was now almost completely conquered. And that is where this story ends. At least the official part. Cause, as I have already mentioned, I myself became my last opponent. And by that I mean that I made a mistake and ruined my game. I don't want to go into it now, but in short, the mod had updated itself through an error, which meant that my game, which was still running on the older version, no longer worked properly. But I could not possibly let everything end like this. Yeah. I'm not sure how to deal with this, but I will try to conquer the world. Even if I can't see my enemies, I can't open this. The only thing I'm now trying is to somehow... How old am I? I have no idea how old I'm. Many functions not longer worked properly, and I had to look for detours to accent some functions. But the war still worked the same, even though I was always a little afraid that my game would crash. And so I slowly conquered all the remaining factions. But suddenly I realized that my character could die at any time, and I was not at all sure if I had secured my succession, or if my empire would collapse completely in case of my death. However, I also did not want to test it, and so I hurried to conquer everything. Only Mongolia was left, and I had a hard time conquering it. But suddenly, what the fuck? What? What is happening here? Fortunately, the empire was not divided, and so I ended the war and conquered the last remnants of Mongolia. Fortunately, I was able to set my Roman title as the primary title. And so, this campaign comes finally to an end. Despite everything that has happened, I was able to conquer the world. While editing, I just noticed that I forgot to change the religion. Yeah, guess I have to do that now. Okay, guys, I think it's impossible to change the faith under these conditions. But with the world conquest, this campaign, which began 5 months ago, ends. I wanted to say at this point again, thank you to all who have supported this project. I always enjoyed reading the comments from you, and have now made over 700 subscribers through this series alone. That's incredible. Also, to the mod team of this mod, a thank you, because they have made all this possible with their incredible mod. Of course, more campaign will follow in the future. I also have a few ideas for new projects and challenges and general video ideas. Write me your favorite part of this series in the comments, and if you have a wish which faction I should play next, you can also write me that down below in the comments. See you around.